I always have to worry about whether my house is in some sort of order behind me. I knit, so I always have lots of Afghans laying around, excuse me. Now this week we are going to talk about specifically the creation of life within myths. And I can hear you saying, this class is about myth and monsters. So why are we going to cover creation myths? Why? Because everything except for energy and matter have a beginning. And we're examining the evolution of modern myth from ancient tales. Now there is a very well-known, very popular modern monster in the modern world, and that is, of course, Frankenstein's creature. Now Frankenstein's creature does not have a name, so we will refer to him as Frankenstein's monster or creature. Even though originally he wasn't really a monster. So it makes the question, what is a monster and what is the definition of a monster and how do monsters become monsters? And we'll have to examine that issue. Now, why do I want to talk about creation myths other than they are the beginning? Because Frankenstein has its root in creation myths and the myth of the male mother, the first creation myths. If you study creation myths from different cultures, they pretty much have the same basic or common aspects. And one of the most basic aspects is the primal abyss. Now, the abyss can be called several things. Sometimes it's just the void. Sometimes it is the abyss. Within Greek myth, it is chaos. And even within Norse myth, it is Gununga Gap or the grinning gap. And these myths that have the abyss often reflect cultural aspects or even geographical aspects of the cultures in which they arise. For example, the Grinning Gap has fire on one side and ice on the other side, and it is volcanoes and glaciers. But out of this primal abyss, or the void, arises the first deity or the first being. Now, I firmly believe that in very early cultures, that first deity or being was female. And there's a good reason why I believe this, because the first deity is what creates the universe, or in essence, gives birth to the universe. And which gender is it that gives birth? Da, 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 da. Bingo, females. Now, in the Pelasgian creation myth, you have the goddess Eurynome, and she arises from the abyss, and she creates the great serpent Ophion from the north wind, and the north wind impregnates her, and she gives birth to the universal or the cosmic egg, out of which everything in the universe comes. So she is a magnum mater, which is Latin for the great mother. Now, as time progressed, we see some hermaphroditic deities, and one predates Eurynome, and that is Atum from Egypt. And Atum is the great he-she, who in essence has sexual relations with him/herself and gives birth to the other deities, and then in turn the universe is created. You also have a hermaphroditic deity in one of the creation myths in Greek myth. And remember, most of these myths had variations, most of these cultures had variations about the myth, and they didn't have any problem with that. So you will find different tales describing the same event in many of these myths. But back to Eros. Eros is a hermaphrodite, has both the male and female organs, and gives birth to the silver egg that gestates in the womb of darkness, which is, of course, the moon. Now, in many other myths, Eros is known as Aphrodite's son, but originally he was much more important and was not related to Aphrodite in that aspect. But as time passed on and societies became increasingly patriarchal, then that first deity, the first being, became increasingly male. Now, the ancients did not always understand the process of conception. For example, for a long time, the Greeks believed that a woman could get pregnant by eating beans or standing out in the north wind, as did Eurynome, how she got pregnant with the egg even though Ophion was the symbol of that wind. So they didn't always understand the process of conception, but as they increasingly did, then it was the male who came out. But there's a problem, because males can't give birth. So the male would create life in other ways than did the first female deities. Now, this then gave a rise to male mothers and other myths, and we see quite a few of these. For example, you have Enki in the Descent of Inanna creates the Galatur and the Krugara out of the dirt underneath his fingernails. He is a male mother. He is a male deity who essentially creates life without a uterus or a womb. Yahweh creates Adam, and then Adam in turn gives birth to Eve from his rib. Now, Adam is immortal and cannot do this or accomplish this without supernatural means, but he has a God who helps him. In Norse myth, Ymir, who arises from Ginnungagap, it's often said that he creates humans out of sweating them from underneath his left armpit. But the details of the how the gods came about in Norse myth is kind of complex, and again, you have those variant tales. And then, of course, in Greek myth, you have one of the most important male mothers, and that is Zeus. And Zeus is a male mother in a couple of times. One is when he ingests the Pelasgian Titan goddess Metis, and she is the goddess of wisdom, not witness. He eats her because it's prophesied that if she ever has a son, that son will overthrow Zeus. Now, she was not pregnant with a son. She was pregnant with Athena. And Athena gestates in Zeus's head. And when she is fully grown, she starts poking him, and Hephaestus whops him upside of the head, and out jumps Athena. Because Athena is a product of a male mother, she remains a virgin her whole life, and she says that she is always for her father. She rejects her basic femininity and the duty of women, which is, of course, to give birth. Now, the other offspring that Zeus births is Dionysus. And Dionysus' mother, Semele, was a mortal, and Zeus impregnates her. Hera finds out, blasts Semele, and Zeus saves the embryo and implants it in the inside of his thigh. Now, Athena is the goddess of wisdom because of two reasons. She springs from Zeus's mind. He is the supreme God of the universe, and he is the repository of all wisdom. But he's the repository of all wisdom because he ate the goddess of wisdom, Metis. Athena inherits that title. Dionysus gestates not in the head, but a little bit lower down, closer to Zeus's sexual organs. When Dionysus is born, and I'm not clear on how Dionysus was born. I'm sure it was a cesarean section, but when Dionysus is born, he's extremely sexual. He's very dark and he's very brooding. He's very licentious. So Zeus is a male mother 2 times. There are other male mothers. Rabbis create the golem out of mud and bring it to life with the ineffable name of God. And so all throughout mythic history, you see the birth of, I hesitate to say children, but you see the birth of creatures from male mothers. And this continues on even into modern science, because science continuously seeks to be able to create life out of a womb. And we have male mothers in the modern world, but I guess they qualify as male mothers, but that guy who gave birth to a baby, he was a woman. I don't buy into that at all. So why is this important to our next realm of study, which is Frankenstein? Well, Frankenstein's creature, I should say, is a product of a male mother. And that, of course, is Victor Frankenstein. And when we get into the novel, we will examine passages that very clearly show that. But I'm going to talk about that in the next video.